She didn't leave because you weren't enough. She left because the version of you she met stopped existing, and you didn't notice when it happened. Listen to me carefully, because this is the part most men never hear. When a woman pulls away, it almost never starts with another man. It starts with a slow internal shift where her nervous system stops feeling safe, stimulated, or emotionally anchored around you. As a psychologist, I've watched this pattern repeat across cultures, ages, and relationship lengths. Men think love is lost in one dramatic moment. Women lose it quietly, weeks or months earlier, while you're still acting like everything is fine. What makes this painful is that most men respond in the exact opposite way of what actually works. When she distances herself, you lean in harder. You explain more. You chase clarity. You overgive. You try to prove your value. But attraction doesn't grow in environments of emotional pressure. It collapses. And the more you try to pull her back emotionally, the more her instincts tell her to pull away. Here's the truth most dating advice won't tell you. The moment she feels that your emotional stability depends on her response, her attraction begins to erode. Not because she's cruel, but because female desire is wired to move toward grounded presence, not emotional hunger. When your sense of self shrinks around her approval, she feels it immediately, even if she can't explain it. I want you to understand something that may sting at first. Women don't miss men who beg, chase, or plead. They miss men who become unfamiliar again. Men whose emotional center doesn't orbit around being chosen. Men who re-anchor themselves so strongly that the woman begins to feel the absence of his gravity, not the noise of his need. This is where most men make a fatal mistake. They believe pulling back means playing games or pretending not to care. That's not what I'm talking about. Emotional withdrawal without inner growth feels cold and manipulative, and women sense that instantly. What actually shifts her psychology is when your silence is peaceful, not resentful. When your distance isn't punishment, but self-respect in motion. When a woman realizes she no longer has emotional access to you the way she once did, her mind begins to search for you again. Not because you disappeared, but because you stopped leaking your identity into the relationship. You returned to being a full man, not a reaction to her moods. I've seen women come back not because the man asked them to, but because something inside him changed so profoundly that it disrupted her certainty. Certainty kills attraction. Familiarity kills desire. Growth reintroduces mystery, and mystery reactivates emotion. If you do this right, she won't feel abandoned. She'll feel curious. She'll feel the loss of emotional priority without feeling attacked. And that combination is powerful. It forces her to confront something she didn't expect to feel, the absence of your emotional availability without the presence of conflict. This is where restraint becomes your strongest move. Not texting to get a reaction, not posting to provoke jealousy, but genuinely redirecting your energy into your body, your purpose, your discipline, and your emotional regulation. When your life starts expanding again, her nervous system notices the shift before her conscious mind does. The men who get begged to come back are not the men who try to be unforgettable. They are the men who become unshakable. And once a woman feels that she is no longer the axis of your emotional world, she begins to feel something dangerous and compelling at the same time. Respect mixed with uncertainty. And that is where everything begins to change. Here's where things get uncomfortable. But stay with me. When a woman starts to emotionally detach, she is watching one thing more closely than anything else: how you handle loss of control. Not loss of her, loss of control over the narrative you had in your head, the fantasy that love stays stable if you behave well enough, the illusion that effort alone guarantees loyalty. Most men collapse right here. They panic. They seek reassurance. They try to negotiate attraction like a contract, but female psychology doesn't respond to negotiation in moments of emotional shift. It responds to emotional self-containment. When you can hold uncertainty without rushing to fix it, something very rare happens in her mind. She begins to question her own decision. Let me explain why. A woman expects emotional fallout when she pulls away. Tears, anger, long messages, dramatic conversations, attempts to pull her back into safety. When those things don't come, her brain doesn't relax. It activates. She wonders why you're not destabilized. And when she can't easily locate your emotional state, her curiosity reattaches. This isn't manipulation. This is psychology. Human beings are wired to value what feels emotionally autonomous. When your emotional regulation stays intact even as the relationship destabilizes, you communicate strength without saying a word. And strength, especially calm strength, reawakens attraction that arguments never could. There's another layer most men miss. When you stop trying to convince her, you force her to sit with her own feelings. Chasing distracts her from processing the loss. Silence paired with growth does not. It removes the emotional noise she was leaning on to justify leaving. Suddenly, she has space to feel what she actually lost. And here's the key detail. Women don't miss attention. They miss how a man made them feel about themselves when he was emotionally grounded. If your presence once made her feel safe, desired, feminine, and emotionally expanded, she will notice when that energy is no longer available to her, but only if your absence is clean. Clean absence means no guilt messages, no emotional dumping, no passive-aggressive distance, no I'm fine energy laced with resentment. It means you genuinely return to your own frame. Your routines tighten. Your physical state improves. Your purpose becomes louder than your heartbreak, not as an act, but as a necessity. When that happens, something shifts inside her. She begins to feel like she lost access to a version of you that she assumed would always be there. And assumptions are where desire goes to die. Once those assumptions break, emotional recalibration begins. I've worked with women who swore they were done, only to feel a sudden pull weeks later when the man didn't chase, didn't spiral, and didn't try to win her back. Not because he vanished, but because he emotionally matured in real time. That maturity redefined the dynamic. This is why begging never works. It reinforces the belief that she made the right decision. Growth creates doubt. Calm creates reflection. Self-respect creates attraction. And I want to be very clear about something important. This is not about getting her back at all costs. This is about becoming the version of yourself that does not collapse when love is uncertain. Ironically, that version is the one women feel safest returning to. When she senses that you would be okay with or without her, but still emotionally present and warm, her internal power balance shifts. She's no longer the emotional authority. You are standing beside her, not beneath her. That's when messages start appearing that don't ask questions directly. That's when she checks your tone, your availability, your emotional temperature. Not consciously, but instinctively. And if you've done this right, she won't feel chased. She'll feel drawn. Because the most powerful thing you can do after she leaves isn't to convince her. It's to become someone who no longer needs convincing. Now, let's get deeper because this is where most men completely miss the point. Attraction is not about words, dates, or gifts. It is about the psychological gravity you hold in her mind and nervous system. Every interaction you've ever had with her created a set of emotional associations, some subtle, some glaring. When a man collapses emotionally, he doesn't just scare her away, he rewires her perception of him, teaching her that he is a resource she can drain, a man whose value fluctuates with her moods. Most men never see this because they confuse attention with connection. You may think texting her all night proves love. You may believe remembering every small detail makes her attached. But here's the truth. Attachment without respect isn't desire. Desire doesn't grow from availability. It grows from consistency, unpredictability, and self-possession. Women are wired to feel safe with predictable integrity and intrigued by unpredictability that signals competence, control, and emotional depth. When you panic, over-explain, or act needy, you destroy both. Here's the paradox. The very behaviors that feel like proof of love are the ones that make her question it. Because neediness communicates instability. Overinvestment communicates desperation. And both trigger subtle fear in her nervous system. Fear that the man she is with cannot anchor himself when life, emotions, or circumstances change. That fear quietly erodes desire faster than anything else. What is work is invisible to the casual observer. It's the kind of presence that makes her feel like she's missing something without realizing what. You don't overreach, you don't overcomplicate, you hold your frame, tend to your ambitions, and let your emotional equilibrium speak louder than any conversation ever could. In that space, she begins to search. She begins to wonder, did I leave something irreplaceable? And yes, this takes patience. A week, 2 weeks, a month, it doesn't matter. Because women are not mechanical, they are deeply intuitive. They respond to patterns, not panic. The man who comes back too quickly, trying to reverse decisions, only confirms her internal conclusion that he is reactive, dependent, and easy to predict. Easy to predict is invisible. Invisible is forgotten. Here's the clincher. Emotional scarcity creates magnetic pull, not by withholding attention maliciously, but by reclaiming your energy, by investing in your body, your mind, your routines, your purpose, by showing, not telling, that your existence is full, vibrant, and independent of her choice. That combination of calm, autonomy, and undeniable presence is irresistible. You have to understand one more key layer. When a woman begins to feel her emotional access is restricted, she doesn't simply crave attention. She craves the emotional validation she once took for granted. Not to manipulate, not to punish, but because your energy once expanded her world. And now suddenly it is no longer fully available. That absence awakens a longing she may not even consciously recognize, but it moves her deeply, subtly, and persistently. You also need to know the danger zone. Men often misinterpret silence for loss and respond with frantic attempts to win her back. That destroys everything. Instead, what's required is inner expansion. The man who becomes compelling after she pulls away is rarely one she can chase down. He is the man who turned his attention inward, who elevated himself physically, mentally, and emotionally without depending on her acknowledgement. That's the moment she begins to feel the pull of what she lost, not what she could have had. Emotional gravity, autonomy, and consistency create invisible threads. Threads she can feel before she even articulates them. Threads that pull her toward curiosity, reflection, and ultimately, longing. And once those threads are strong, you hold the power to reshape the relationship dynamic entirely. She doesn't see it as manipulation. She experiences it as magnetic inevitability. This is the psychological architecture of return. Not begging, not chasing, not bargaining, pure disciplined presence. The man who masters this doesn't just get a second chance. He commands desire at a level most men will never understand. When you can truly embrace your emotional sovereignty, she will begin to remember not just what you gave her, but what she lost when she allowed herself to drift from you. And that is when everything begins to tip back in your favor. This is where the real power begins, and it's uncomfortable because it challenges everything you thought you knew about relationships. Most men live as if love is earned through effort, yet desire responds only to presence. When you stop spinning your identity around her validation, something remarkable happens. She begins to feel the emotional tension she unconsciously craves. The same tension that first drew her to you in the early days of excitement, unpredictability, and mystery. Women do not fall back in love with men who apologize for their emotional autonomy. They fall back in love with men who embody it. That means your actions, your growth, your life, everything you invest energy into outside her is more magnetic than words. The dinners, the texts, the constant check-ins, they pale in comparison to the emotional sovereignty you project silently. When she senses that you are unshakable, intriguing, and emotionally expansive, her nervous system begins a process that is difficult to resist. She notices the absence of urgency in your energy, yet the presence of purpose in your life. Here's the nuance that men miss entirely. You cannot create desire by withholding. You create it by living fully. Desire grows when she observes you thriving without her constant engagement. It isn't scarcity as a tactic, it's abundance as a state of being. Every push you once made to regain her attention is replaced with self-mastery, and that is where the shift happens. Attraction is never restored by panic. It is awakened by demonstration of value, depth, and emotional resilience. And understand this, a woman's curiosity is not arbitrary. She subconsciously tracks how a man handles absence, uncertainty, and his own emotional center. The more calm and composed you remain, the more she questions her previous choice. And in that questioning, desire begins to regenerate. The woman who once walked away starts feeling the pull to reclaim emotional access, not because she manipulated herself, but because the energy she once felt is now absent, and absence creates longing. You must also realize how subtle this effect is. It is rarely conscious. She will not immediately articulate, "I miss him because he is calm and grounded." Instead, she experiences subtle tension, reflection, and emotional dissonance. She notices your changes in posture, your deeper voice, your silent confidence, your habits, your focus. All of these cues collectively signal that you are no longer a reflection of her approval, but a fully formed, self-contained man. That's magnetic. That's irresistible. At this point, you have created a scenario where she is psychologically compelled to reevaluate her choices. The craving doesn't come from guilt, it comes from recognition. She perceives what she lost, the space she gave up, and the man she underestimated. The longing she feels is not for attention, but for the emotional state she once felt in your presence, the excitement, stability, and depth she cannot replace elsewhere. Here's the final, critical insight. This is not about winning her back to prove something. It's about demonstrating your full value through action and presence. You no longer orbit her decisions. You orbit yourself. In that orbit, you generate a pull that is invisible, yet irresistible. You do not need to chase. You do not need to plead. The stronger you become in your autonomy, the stronger her desire becomes for what she subconsciously knows she cannot control. If you master this, the return is inevitable, but only if your growth is authentic, consistent, and relentless. She will begin to notice. She will begin to feel. And when she reaches that point, her mind and body align, creating an internal gravitational pull that draws her back toward you naturally. Now, I want you to consider this equation carefully, because it will reveal everything about your current emotional strategy. Emotional independence, plus consistent growth, chasing, magnetic return. Type the answer in the comments below. Reflect on where you are in this equation. Like this video if it hit you hard, subscribe for the latest insights you won't hear anywhere else, and share this with a friend who needs to hear this truth before it's too late.